everybody! In this video, you'll be learning about structures or structs in C#. The agenda of my video will be what are structs, syntax and declaration of a struct or a structure, important rules to follow with structures. So let's get straight into it. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to create a console application in Visual Studio. Over here, I've created a console application in Visual Studio. So first, let's understand about what is a struct. Basically, a struct is a value type that is a collection of data types under a single unit. So it is almost similar to classes, so it can contain fields, parameterized constructors, properties, static constructors, methods, constants, and so on. Okay? So when do we use structures? Basically, the answer to that is that we use structures when we want to hold small data values without the need of inheritance. That means that we cannot inherit a struct. So you'll be learning about all of these concepts later in this video. So now let's take a look at how we can declare a struct. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to use the struct keyword to declare a struct. For a structure, struct, and hit tab. For shortcut struct, so it's not to be called my struct. Instead, I'm going to call this students, just like that. So that's how we can declare a struct. And now inside of the structure called student, we will have some properties and fields. So we're going to have a property for a field. So we have to create the private property for that, right? Instead of doing that, you can just say prop and hit tab. So this will even create a property for you. So just private, let's go ahead and call this underscore ID, and the public int ID, we're returning everything perfect. So now I'm just gonna click enter just to make this a little bit more cleaner. So now as you can see, we have a field, a private field. So even a class can contain that. Just like I said, it can have fields. And now we are having a property over here for this field. So just like I said, we can even have a property. Okay, so now we'll have another one, another field and property, prop full. So prop full tab is gonna be a string instead of my var. I'm gonna change this to underscore name. So this one is for name, and my property should also be name. Okay. Hit enter. Okay. So now we'll have a method. Okay. So that'll be for printing out the values of name and ID. So public void returns nothing. Print student info. Okay. And inside of here we can say console.writeLine, and what we want to write is ID colon, and we'll have a dollar sign over here actually. ID colon placeholder, and over here the value of ID. And in a new line, so slash n backslash n. In a new line, we're gonna have name. So name colon placeholder, and inside of here we will have name. Okay, just like that. And now we have a method inside of here. So inside of a structure, just like I said, we can even have a method. So now what I'm going to do is inside of this main method, I'm going to create an instance of this structure. We can do that with or without the new keyword. So I'm going to do that without the new keyword. So first type, so I'm just going to say students, semicolon. And we're not initializing that. Then say student dot okay, and it's not called print, it's called print student info. Okay, and actually for now I'm gonna include the new keyword. So equals new students. Okay, brackets. And now let's go ahead and run the program. So control plus F5 in order to run my program. Okay. So as you can see, the output is 0 and an empty string. So now while we're creating an instance of this structure over here, we don't pass in any parameters to the constructor. So that's because that means that the compiler has created a default parameterless constructor inside of the structure or for the structure. But we cannot explicitly specify or create a default parameterless constructor. We can only have a parameterized constructor. So let me just show you that. Over here, if I try to create a constructor, so ctr tab with no parameters. We have no parameters for the constructor. As you can see, we have an error. Struct cannot contain explicit parameterless constructor. So if we specify a parameter over here, then that error will be gone. Okay. So what the compiler does inside of this default parameterless constructor that it creates is it'll assign all of the fields or all of the variables their default values. So over here we have ID, right? It's of type integer, right? So what's the default value for an integer? Basically, that's 0. So that's why we saw 0 on the console. And for a string name, the default value is null, an empty string. And that's why we saw an empty string on the console, okay? So now what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to provide this constructor with two parameters, okay? So the first one is going to be an integer, ID, and the second is going to be a string name. So what we will do inside of this constructor is that we will initialize the property name, so name, set to the parameter name that has been passed in. And we will set, so actually we don't have to assign the property, instead we assign the field. So underscore name, that is the name of our field. So we have that over here, right? Underscore name equals the name that has been passed in, and underscore ID, I'm going to set this to the ID that has been passed in, okay? So I'm going to come over here and pass in the values for ID and name. So first, pass in ID, so 10, and the name is going to be optional, okay? And now let's go ahead and run the program. Control plus F5 in order to run my program. And let's check will be that. Okay, so Control plus F5. Okay, so output is 10 and output, which is the expected output because we have to pass that in over here, right? The value of ID is 10 and the value of name is option. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this where we are passing in the ID and the name, and I'm going to create an object initializer. Inside of here, we're going to initialize name and ID. Name, subjects, ID. I'm going to set this to 10. Okay. So now let's go ahead and run the program and check what will be that. Okay. We should get the same output. That is Akshat and 10 on the console. Control plus F5. So the expected output has been shown on the console. That is Akshat and 10. Okay. So now let's go ahead and close that. So this also will work same as classes. Okay, so now I'm just going to come over here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this method mark it as static. Okay, then we can't call this like that. We need to call this directly by the class name, the structure name, because it is static. So now let's go and run the program and check what is going to be happening. So it has failed. Um, So actually the error we're getting over here is that an object reference is required for the non-static field, method, or property student ID. So now we want to solve this error. We need to go over here all of the places and make those static. Instead of doing that, I'm just going to comment out this line of code, and I'm going to print some other text onto the console just to prove that this static method is getting executed. I'm going to print out my name. Okay. And let's go and run the program. And now what it'll do is it's going to print out Akshit onto the console. Okay, so Control plus Fi. Okay, the expected output is Akshit, which is even on the console. Okay, so the output was Akshit, and now what I'm going to do is I want to say that we cannot have destructors for structures. Okay, so right here if I use a destructor, so students, okay, so as you can see we have an error. It says only class types can contain destructors. So we get this error because just like I said, structures are value types, and it does not make any sense, or there's no point of having a destructor inside of a value type. That's because the objects are going to be removed when their scope is over, and destructors, if you don't know, are used to kill objects. Okay, so it really makes no sense to have destructors inside of structures. Okay, so I'm just going to remove that. So now we've seen that structures also can have constructors, but only parameterized constructors. And if we don't have a parameterized constructor, then like I said, the compiler is going to create a default parameterless constructor for us. Okay. The next thing that we saw was, we cannot explicitly specify a constructor, a parameterless constructor inside of a structure, just like how we do inside of a class. Okay. So the next thing we saw was that structures can have constants, methods, fields, properties, static members, and so on, right? And structures can also implement interfaces, just like how we can implement interfaces for classes. But we cannot inherit another class or an interface class or another structure in a structure, or from another class or a structure. Okay, we'll see this in the next video. And one more thing, that a structure cannot be marked as abstract, virtual, or even sealed. We'll see even that in the next video. We will continue talking about structures in the next video. And with that, I hope you have understood about structures in C#. Goodbye till the next video. Thanks for watching. Until then, enjoy C#.